Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the fifth day of Biology Week. Today, our talk will be held by a very well established faculty member of ISA Kolkata, whose classroom sessions are a joy to be in by all her students. So, let me introduce you without further ado. Anindita Bhadra is an associate professor and the associate dean of international relations and outreach at the Indian Institute of Science, Education and Research, Kolkata. She is a behavioral biologist who joined ISO Kolkata in June 2009 and established the Dog Lab. She was the founding chairperson of the Indian National Young Academy of Science, as well as the past co-chair of the Global Young Academy. Apart from her engagement in research, teaching, and science outreach, she is a thespian, being engaged with the theatre group Kalyani Mukhosh. Today, she will be discussing perspectives from her research on the stray dogs of India. These dogs are a ubiquitous part of the urban jungle, and their close interactive association with humans calls for a better understanding of their behavior. Dr. Bhadra and her students have been conducting various behavioral and cognitive studies on these animals for over 10 years now. So, without any more delay, let's learn about this together. Ma'am, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Arunima, for the very nice introduction. I'm very happy to be here, especially because this is an event by Cogito, which I have a very warm spot in my heart for. So let me begin by sharing the screen. Just let me know if the screen is visible.
Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and talk to you about some of the work that we do on stray dogs, street dogs, free ranging dogs, as you would call them. Uh, I am associated with Cogito since its inception, so it's a bigger pleasure to be invited by Cogito to do this talk. And as Ornima said, I'm also associated with the Global Young Academy and International Young Academy of Science as alumni now. And I also happen to be a member of the Royal Society of Biology, so it's kind of a double engagement that I have today with this event. So our lab is called the Dog Lab. It is part of the Department of Biological Sciences at ISA Kolkata. And we try to probe into the private lives of dogs without doing any harm to them. Anyone who's interested in our work can visit this website and find out much more details and also our publications on this website. When I say our lab and the dog lab, it's all the people who make the dog lab, not the dogs. And these are the various PhD and master's students who have worked over the last 12 and a half years that I have been here. And we've always had a whole bunch of interns doing winter projects, summer projects, external students doing their MS dissertations. And I don't have their images to fit everyone on the screen, but I first acknowledge all the students who have incorporated, their research into the bigger theme of the research of the dog lab, and the dog lab is them. So when we talk of dogs, there is a well-established idea of how they came into being, and fossil records, genetic history, everything tells us that the ancestors of dogs were either the gray wolves or a similar animal from which perhaps the wolves and the dogs both have evolved. The process by which wolves gave rise to dogs is known as domestication process, and the dogs are known to be the first organism to be domesticated by humans even before we invented agriculture approximately 10 to 11,000 years ago. What we often don't know is that majority of the dogs, if you consider the entire dog population of the world, actually come in the form of free-ranging or stray dogs, not in the form of pets. So 70 to 80% of dogs across the world are actually living on streets, are natural, free-living, freely breeding populations. The free-ranging dogs are very interesting to us from a biological point of view because they perhaps represent an earlier condition of domestication when the dogs were already living among humans, living on scraps, following them around, maybe even taken together for hunting from time to time, but not really pets. And this was, of course, much before people started breeding dogs and creating very diverse breeds from the German Shepherd to the Chihuahua for their own personal pleasure. So breeds, pedigreed dogs are, very expensive. They are given a lot of importance these days, but they are a very recent phenomena, perhaps max 200 years old. If you look at the distribution of the dogs, then they are everywhere in the global south, and they are also found in some parts of Europe, in Italy, definitely, and in Russia, in some cities, you do find stray dogs. But still, a lot of studies have not been done on the free ranging dogs. We are very happy that after we started looking at free ranging dogs as a taking a comprehensive approach of behavior, ecology, and evolution, there are now groups across the world, in Germany, in Chile, in Brazil, who have started studying their free ranging dog populations. So dogs in urban spaces are our special interest. They are, of course, present in all kinds of human habitats. They are primarily scavengers. They can hunt, but typically in cities you don't find them hunting, though you have reports of dogs hunting in kind of forest fringes and remote rural areas at times. They are largely dependent on humans for their food and shelter, as I'll show you. They live in small to medium groups of three, four, five, at max maybe 8 or 10. They have, of course, both positive as well as negative interactions with humans, and they are known by all kinds of names, indies, sweeties, ferals, but technically we should call them the free ranging dogs. When you look at the life of a dog, ever since it's born, it has multiple complex interactions with its mother, its siblings, other group members, and some of this I will actually tell you in brief in my talk today. And then with humans, humans show them love. Humans also are a threat to their survival in many ways. So this is kind of the spectrum of dog-human relationships that we see, uh, going from feeding, vaccinating, taking care of lame dogs and giving them shelter, to poisoning them and killing them. Of course, we have to remember when we are talking of free ranging populations of dogs that they are a major source of rabies, and rabies is a threat in India till date. Roughly 36% of the world's rabies deaths occur in India. So there is need for awareness, there is need for rabies control. A favorite story of mine, which I try to show in every talk I give, is this news report from 2018 of this particular dog from a village in Nepal, which tagged along a team of people who were climbing a very high peak in Nepal in the Himalayas. And this is when they have reached the summit and they are sharing a meal. This reminds me of this other dog that most Indians are aware of. Most of us have read or heard the story of Mahabharata, where in the last part, the Pandavas are going to heaven, which is basically a trek up the Himalayas, and a stray dog follows them. And the stray dog eventually reaches the summit with Yudhishthir while others have fallen. This is such an interesting story to me because this tells me that the stray dog behavior in India has been the same from the time of the Mahabharata till today. Um, so they are a very interesting model system for evolution. We in the subcontinent definitely, and maybe in other parts of the world, have a very long shared history of living with them. And when we talk about dog human conflict, then understanding the behavioral ecology of these dogs can help us to devise better methods to reduce the conflict which exists in our population. So, of course, we also have this advantage as researchers that we can just step out of the lab and study these dogs. We don't have to travel to remote areas like my friends in Germany and Vienna, who have to go to the global south to find populations and work on them. Another aspect of our work, which fits into the global sustainable goals of 2030, forth by the United Nations is that we can definitely put our work in the perspective of three of these 17 goals. One is good health and well-being, taking the One Health approach to control rabies, sustainable cities and communities, because we are talking about urban ecology, and of course, life on land. So at the Dog Lab, we try to address various questions regarding the behavior ecology and cognition of the free ranging dogs. We broadly ask how dogs interact with each other in terms of mating behavior, parental care behavior, sibling sibling interactions, territorial interactions, and competition over food space and mates. We ask how dogs interact with humans in terms of humans as resources, in terms of humans as threats, also do a lot of experiments in terms of testing how smart dogs are, testing their cognitive abilities, and their ability to solve tasks, the ability to distinguish quantities, and in terms of their food preference and the ability to find preferred food. While we do these various different aspects of the work, the big picture is that we are finally trying to understand how dogs became man's best friend. So let me give you kind of glimpses into the work we do, and I've tried to keep it as non-technical as possible. So if we try to understand how a dog spends its day on our streets, we need to find out what the dog does throughout the day. What are the different behaviors it's spending its time in? When does it sleep? When is it active? And dogs are supposed to be nocturnal animals because of their history, because they've evolved from nocturnal ancestors. So we went out to test whether dogs are indeed nocturnal. Are they more active during the night than during the day? We definitely hear them barking and howling at night, but what else are they doing? And this work was done by Urunita, who also happens to be the chief editor of Cogito, where she actually went around ISIL Kolkata campus and in areas nearby and took data on sightings of dogs and what behavior the dog was showing at that particular time. We call this scan sampling, and this was scan sampling at the population level. And these are the sites where she was doing her work. And she tried to collect data over the 24 hours of the day. And this data collection spanned over different seasons. So she spent a whole year and little more collecting this data. Eventually, we had 5,669 sightings of dogs. These are not unique dogs, but these are sightings. So same dogs might have been sighted at different times, but on different days and different seasons and so on. On a given day, you just sight a dog only once because you move on and go and do this in different areas. When we put together all of this data, just in terms of time activity budgets, we found that there are different kinds of behaviors. Some behaviors are inactive behaviors, some are more active behaviors. We divided behaviors into activity, inactivity, inactivity like sleeping, piled up or by themselves or lazing or sitting down. Activity, of course, different kinds of activities. Here you have two dogs walking, here you have puppies playing. And then these are divided into self behaviors where you only note the behavior of an individual by itself, like postures, gaits, maintenance, feeding, etc., or interactive behaviors. These could be play, these could be mating, these could be interactions with humans, so on and so forth. And when we analyzed all of this data from all of these sightings, we found that dogs are most active when there are humans around. They are not really nocturnal. So if you look at this graph, then this starts at midnight and goes until midnight, so 24 hours of the day. And the gray zone here shows the period when they are very active, more active than in the white zone. And statistics told us that this is 9 in the morning to 11 in the evening when the dogs are more active than the rest of the day. So definitely they are not clearly nocturnal animals. They are also active during the day. And this basically coincides with the time when humans are also more or less on the streets. With this data, Orunita went on to do a very, very different and interesting kind of study. We had a lot of data and we wondered what we could do with this. And Orunita looked at patterns, intrinsic hidden patterns within behavioral repertoire of dogs. And we found that the frequency distribution of dog behaviors actually follow a power law distribution, which happens to be scale invariant. And I'm sorry. And the distribution also showed multifractal trends. I'm not going into the details of this because this is very complicated calculations which went into this kind of work. We collaborated with physics friends to do this. But anyone who's interested, I would recommend these two videos by Ornita herself, which she has created for some competitions. One is on the paper on time activity budgets, which is on her YouTube channel, and the other is a very nice video with fantastic animations which she created on this particular paper, where we tested the hidden patterns of hidden patterns within behavior, which actually shows language-like tendency. And this opens up very interesting possibilities for future work of predictive modeling. For example, if I see a dog wagging its tail, what is the probability that it can come and bite me in the next 5 minutes? So things like this can be done. I'm just telling you because this gives a very nice overview of what kind of work you could do by simply looking at behaviors of an organism. And this doesn't have to be only dogs. It could be any animal out there for which you could do this kind of studies. I will tell you a bit about what a dog's life on the streets looks like. So when initially we started, we thought we should collect data on survivorship and mortality. So we started collecting data on pup births. And we found that if you go around the year, again, this graph does not start in January, it starts in September and goes until August. So it's one whole year. And if you see here, then during December, January, the number of pups observed in the population peaked and then they dropped. So obviously that there was a seasonality in appearance of pups, and we call this the pup rearing season, when the number of pups in the population increase suddenly. But then the drop means that pups are not all surviving, they are dying. And this is data collected over 5 whole years of pup seasons. So we wanted to know why pups die. Of course, mortality happens. So what level of mortality occurs in the population and why the pups are dying? So when we went and looked for this, and if I just point out here, there were 108 litters with 430 pups. So there were a lot of pups. We followed them on a weekly basis up to 7 months of age, which is when they reach adulthood or begin to reach adulthood. And we found that the various causes of death include human influence death, missing from the population, natural deaths like disease, and some causes were unknown. And when we looked at survivorship, we found that survivorship is gradually decreasing with the age of the pups, with highest mortality occurring when the pups are 4 months old. When we looked very carefully at the various causes of death, we found that most pups who are missing from the population are missing because somebody has picked them up and taken them away. And often we find that these pups, when they grow a little older, are then abandoned, and most of them don't survive. And most often than not, these are really children who are the cause of the death of the pups. So, actually, putting everything together, human induced death was as high as 63% of the total deaths. So, at the end, we had only about 19% of the pups in the total population surviving until adulthood, which is 1 in 5 pups if you take a rough estimate. We wanted to understand how the pups survive when they do, how much care they receive from their mothers, because these are mammals and the mothers definitely need to nurse them. But what else do the mothers do for the survival of the pups? Mothers can show care in two ways. One is their active care towards the pups after they're born, but then even before they're born, other mothers taking precautions when they are pregnant to give birth in a safe place, because we know that in most urban animals, they avoid humans when they give birth. They try and hide their offspring from human disturbance. And so we try to know where pups are being born, what kind of dens mothers are choosing before birth. So parental care is any behavior which a mother or a parent can show towards the offspring, which will increase the chances of offspring survival. Of course, as I said, it can be active, which can takes up a lot of time and energy, or just passive care by spending time with the offspring. And all parental care behaviors would be costly. They would cost the mother time, which would have been better spent in gathering her own reserves, eating and finding food, and it would also cost her a lot of energy investment. So there's always this evolutionary question that are the parents going to invest in one litter, or are they going to maximize their lifetime reproductive success? And there are umpteen number of models which are built taking this into consideration. Of course, for pet dogs, mothers don't have to worry because we breed them. Breeders take care for that the pregnant females are healthy. They help to give birth. Some dogs are put through cesarean sections. There are people to take care of the puppies and nurse them. Um, they are, of course, given vaccines. So there is a lot of caregiving by the humans. But of course, for the dogs, the mother is the only one who has to do all of this. So when we looked at pre-birth maternal care in terms of dens, this work was primarily done by my student Srijani, helped by others. She tracked 148 den sites over a period of 5 years. And when she found a den, we decided a den was a place where pups had been given birth to. And she went and took physical parameters of the den in terms of how big they were, how deep they were, whether there was covering on top, whether there was light inside, whether how far this was from resources, and the litter size that was born in the den. And we also noted the date of birth, so we knew whether it was born in peak winter, before winter, after winter. We also knew how long the pup survived. And doing from all of this data, we had lots of dens. And dens, as you know, people from India would definitely know that dens can be anywhere and everywhere. These are all photographs from our old campus, the transit campus of ISA Kolkata. What we found was that if you look at this 3D graph, with litter size increasing this way and den scores increasing this way, den scores are scores that we gave depending on the different parameters, and this is just the count, then we found that there was definitely a preference for medium to large dens rather than very small, cramped up dens. And we ran some statistical analysis. We did a generalized linear model, and we found that basically the combination of the size of the den and the access to resources, which together contributed to the selection of a den site. Just a very nice den is not enough, or very close to resources alone is not enough. Combination of those two parameters give you the best den selection. And we also found that unlike what is expected of pregnant females and other animals, dog females actually preferred begging over scavenging, and so human company over their solitary foraging when they were ready to give birth. So they also found their dens quite close to humans, and often, as you saw from the photograph, within human households and gardens, garages, etc. So they were definitely not avoiding humans. But then we asked that is this something by chance alone that they are just giving birth wherever they can find a den? So are they just choosing dens randomly, or actually is there a selection process? So now Srijani followed around pregnant females for a month or until they gave birth. And what we found was that females were actually selecting a den site, resting there for a couple of days, rejecting it, moving on to another den site.
One second, it seems that she's been logged out. Yeah, she'll be joining in just a little bit.
Sorry.
No problem. You were talking about the dens last that they
So please
selected.
tell me where actually was from.
Yeah, that they don't avoid humans necessarily. I think it was slide 29 that you were on.
Did I reach here before I went?
You had just started telling them that it is seen that they do prefer to be near humans more, as in,
Right, right.
right.
So this is where I got stuck. So we wanted to ask whether the mothers were actually just randomly giving birth wherever they found a den and it happened to be close to humans, or were they actually putting in effort? Because if it's parental care, then the mother has to put in effort. Otherwise, it's not considered care, right? So Srijani followed around 20 pregnant females for about a month, and she saw that the mothers were selecting a site, resting there for 1 or 2 days, often digging a hole deeper, making arrangements of things around and making herself cozy, but then rejecting this for a next site. And she recorded between 2 to 6 intermediate such dens. And we found that if you looked at the den scores by our parameters, then the final den score was always higher than the first or the intermediate dense scores. So obviously, these dens which the mothers had rejected were by these very parameters not as good as the final den where she gave birth. So we said the mothers are actively selecting dens. So this is indeed parental care. Then we looked at parental care post birth, for which Manabi, this is her thesis. She followed 22 mother litter units from 15 dog groups, again over a period of 5 years and only pup seasons. We could do this work. Her data was from the third week of pup age to the 17th week. The first 2 weeks, the mother typically does not leave the den, does not allow anyone close to the den, so it is impossible to do observations. Uh, she collected a lot of data, and then what we found was if we look at again litter size increasing this way, age of pups increasing this way, and we were looking at the proportion of active care that an individual pup in a litter receives, and we found that there is a trend that as the litter size increases, active care decreases, and as the age of pups increases, active care actually decreases. So basically, what we concluded was that the mother is not, infinitely increasing care per pup if her litter size increases. So if there are fewer pups, individual pups will receive more care. Otherwise, with larger and larger litter sizes, there is going to be a lot more sibling to sibling competition. So the mothers were actually regulating their active care according to the age of the pups as well as the number of the pups. Of course, for the from the pup's perspective, having more siblings is not a good idea. We looked at both active as well as passive care because all of this together is maternal care, and we found that as the pups are growing older, active care is steadily decreasing, passive care is steadily increasing. So overall, the level of care might not be drastically different, but level of active care is going down because that is the most costly form of care, which includes nursing, constantly licking the pups, cleaning them, coming and feeding them, playing with them. Now, nursing is the most important behavior in terms of maternal care. We tried to look at it more carefully. And we also looked at the other kinds of behaviors that the mother shows. What we found is nursing or suckling. Suckling is actually from the perspective of the pups. Nursing is from the perspective of the mother. So you see the pink in this graph is nursing or suckling. The brown is allogrooming. The gray here is piling up and sleeping, which takes a lot of time when the pups are smaller and decreases. Suckling also decreases. The green out here is protective behavior, which increases as the pups are becoming more and more mobile. So the mother is actually adjusting, even within her active care, she's adjusting the levels of different behaviors as the pups are growing. At different ages of pups, the amount of time spent in different behaviors keeps changing. When we look at nursing per se, then 14th week onwards, there was no nursing with a lot of fluctuations over the weeks. We looked at this a little more carefully. We looked at what is the proportion of this each bout of nursing or suckling initiated by the mother and initiated by the pups. Because the mother's interest in nursing would mean she is investing more care, whereas the pup's interest in nursing would mean that the pups are demanding care. And why we were more interested in this? Because there is this fantastic theory, parent offspring conflict theory, provided by Robert Rivers way back in 1974, which has led to a lot of studies, especially modeling exercises, to understand this rivalry or competition between mothers and offspring from the perspective of genetic relatedness and evolutionarily lifetime reproductive success. And we found that weaning actually can be observed very actively if you look at this more carefully, because 8th week onwards, mothers never initiated any of the bouts of nursing. All the initiation was from the interest of the pups. And that is exactly what POC theory says, that when the offspring are small, both mother and offspring should agree that care is necessary. And this is actually in terms of weaning. And beyond a certain age, the offspring and the mother should both agree that no more nursing is necessary. But in this marked region, there should be conflict where the pups will demand to be cared for. Pups would want to be suckling, whereas the mothers would want to replenish her reserves and not nurse any longer. Now, we were not just happy with this, we wanted to look at this even more carefully. So, we looked at each duration of the bout of nursing. When does it start? When does it stop in terms of a bout in minutes? And we looked at this. The red bars show duration of the mother initiated bouts, the blue bars show duration of the pup initiated bouts. And you can see here, the mother initiated bouts are, of course, 0 after 8 weeks, and the pup initiated bouts are the only ones which are remaining here. So this also fitted very nicely with the same window. So we said we can identify this 8 to 13 week period as the weaning window, after which there is no conflict any longer. So based on this, we could create a timeline of maternal care with up to 7 weeks, high level of active care, 8 to 13 week parent offspring conflict, 13 to 16 week mostly passive care. Beyond 16th week, they are mostly not receiving any parental care. While we were doing this, mind we observed that there are actually other adults in the group which sometimes show care. So we looked at this in the data more carefully. What we found was, this is data from all the mother litter units. 5 of them received only maternal care. 3 of them received maternal care plus care from males. Because it's care from someone other than the parent, it's called allocare. 3 litters received care from the mother plus care from other females. 10 litters received care from the mother, females, and males other than their mother. So there was a lot of allocare happening. We definitely needed to understand what kind of allocare was happening. We found that the allo mothers show allocare throughout this same period, but at much lower levels than the mother. So their care is kind of subsidiary care in addition to maternal care. This video, let me just play this for you. This has all the males. None of these are the mothers, and we don't know whether these males who show care, the male here is just spending time with the pups. This male, you can see the pups are soliciting some food from the male, and soon he will regurgitate some food, which is typically a very typical maternal care behavior. But here the male is showing this, and males often show this behavior, and of course they spend a lot of time playing with the pups. So we found that in a group there would be one male who would be allowed near the pups by the mother, and this male would also show a lot of care to the pups. Other males would be, aggressively prevented from approaching the pups by the same mother. So we were very curious, and we tried to look at the kind of care that the males are showing. Sorry. So this is what we had found for the mother, the different behaviors in which the mothers are spending time. We did the similar analysis for the father, And of course, we don't call them father, we call them putative fathers because they are behaving like fathers. We don't know whether they're genetically fathers. Of course, they cannot show any nursing or suckling, but here you see they do pile up and sleep, they do a lot of play, they do a lot of protection. And if you look at the entire data, basically it turns out that mothers feed and fathers play, kind of division of labor, which is happening here. So if you look at the pup's life, early life, we find that there is this mother who's there to care for them. In addition, there are these females who are showing them this expensive maternal care behavior, including nursing. So we asked that why are the allo mothers nursing? I mean, licking them, grooming them, protecting them from other dogs, all of this we can understand. But nursing, which is so expensive, why should the mother nurse someone else's pups? So they again did the same analysis in addition to the mother and pup initiated. In this graph, now we add update allo mother initiated nursing bouts. And where do you find them? All on the x-axis, which means allo mothers never initiated a bout of nursing. 594 allo suckling bouts across 11 litters, all of them only pup initiated. So allo mothers were not really interested in nursing non-filial pups, but the pups were grabbing them and getting some milk out of them whenever possible. And we looked at the termination of nursing bouts. All of the nursing bouts were terminated by allo mothers and not because the pup stopped suckling. So, putting all of this together, we concluded that the allo mothers are really not trying to be very nice female relatives, but they are victims of behavior called milk theft by the pups, something which is known in animals which live in large herds like giraffes, like horses, but has never been reported in any canid or, for that matter, in any carnivore because they don't have sociobiology like herd living animals. So, if you put this all together, a pup definitely has increased chances of survival with caring mothers, helping aunts, sisters, grandmothers in their groups, and their attentive putative fathers. But at the end of the day, only 1 in 5 pups will survive and reach up to adulthood. Urunima, I just wanted to confirm that I'm still audible.
Yes, ma'am, you are.
Okay, thank you. Now, let me now switch gears a bit from behavior and go on to look at how dogs survive eventually. I told you they don't hunt. Typically, they rely on humans for their resources. Of course, there are dogs which get actively fed by humans, but naturally, they are scavengers. So, scavenging is a very, very important behavior, and dogs are extremely efficient as scavengers because that is how they've been surviving for so long. So, we try to understand how they scavenge. What is the modality of scavenging? If you look at the urban scavengers, then the dogs are not the only ones. There are other urban scavengers which are relying on the same resources. We also have started a study now in which Shorab is trying to look at the entire scavenging community, and we see there are a large number of birds, squirrels, even goats, cows, and of course cats, with which dogs are competing for the same resources. So how do they do this? One of the early students, Aninduru, did this work for his IPhD project, where he would put small bread pieces on this kind of tray, soaked in different things with different levels of meat smell. So, water soaked bread, dry bread, bread soaked in chicken broth, and he was trying to see what do the dogs do. Do they actually go for whatever piece of bread they come across first, or do they actually sniff, find out, and then feed? And what we found is dogs use what we called a sniff and snatch strategy. So if they sniff something with meat smell in it, they'll immediately eat it. If they don't, they will go and sniff other things to see what is available to them. And we realize that if they do this, then they can very efficiently sniff out food which has meat in it. So they will get a good source of protein. And we did a series of these experiments, which also showed that while adults are very good at it, juveniles are not. So they probably learn this through their scavenging experiences while they are scavenging with the adults. And we also found that there is supposed to be a rule of thumb, or rather, we deciphered that there's perhaps a rule of thumb by which the dogs are working, which just says if it smells like meat, eat it. Now, Anindita's experiments, you involved small pellets of food served on a platter to a single dog. So we asked, are the dogs going to be this choosy? Are they going to take their time to sniff and find out their preferred food when they actually have to forage from garbage? So Rohan came in and did this experiment. We actually created dustbins. So this is called the dustbin experiment. You have these nice red baskets in which Rohan puts one box has 10 pieces of chicken, small pieces of chicken. Another has five small pieces of chicken, five pieces of bread. Another has 10 pieces of bread. All of them have a lot of garbage collected from the street side and dumped into these boxes to simulate a dustbin. Rohan did the first set of experiments with 96 adults. Each dog is given just 1 minute time to approach. Once they approach, they have 1 minute in which they can eat whatever they can. And then Rohan goes and shuts the boxes and takes them away and then dumps the contents, counts what has gone from what is remaining. And this simple method tells us what the dogs have eaten. And in doing this, what we found was that if you look at the percentage of time a box was eaten from first, then the protein box was the most preferred, followed by the mixed and carbohydrate. And mixed and carbohydrate were not statistically different. So they were definitely sniffing out the meat and eating it very efficiently. So even when they had a lot of garbage, from it they had to find the food, they were definitely using the rule of thumb. But they were not rejecting the bread, though the meat was eaten more. Once they eat the meat, then they'll go and eat the bread too, given they have the time remaining within that 1 minute, after which the box is snatched away from them. So protein was eaten more, which is the chicken, as compared to bread, but there was definitely selection of foraging because we saw this preference. Now Rohan said, let's make life more difficult for the dogs. Here we lure a dog away from its group and give it this nice kind of platter to choose from, even if it has to do the job of sniffing out, finding the food and eating it. However, it doesn't have any competition. How will groups of dogs behave if we give them the same task? So he has done a series of experiments and he has seen that typically one dog, so they don't all approach together. If we look at the first responder, here M is mixed, P is protein, and C is carbohydrate. So the mixed box for the first and the second responder, for the first responder, mixed and the protein box are chosen equally. So they're equally likely to feed from both. So if they have smelled meat, they'll eat it, whether in the meat box or in the mixed box. For the second responder, the mixed box has a higher probability of being eaten from than the protein. Protein and carbohydrate are almost equal, so competition matters. But for the rest of the responders, they eat from wherever they get a chance. So if you look at the level of the group, then we are definitely seeing that there is still a preference for meat. Of course, early responders are at an advantage over the late responders. This work is now completed and Rohan is into analysis and writing of papers. But what we can definitely say is the rule of thumb still works even in the harsh condition of competition and scavenging. So this is definitely something that the dogs are utilizing in their day-to-day lives for scavenging for food. Now, remember I said humans and dogs have complex interactions and we are a source of food and shelter for them. I showed you how shelter in terms of dens. Now let's move on to looking at dog-human interactions from the perspective of food and other interactions. By the way, Rohan did a very nice video on this work. If you're interested, go check it out. It's on YouTube, and he won the Euraxis Science Slam for this. So we asked, how well do dogs understand humans? So if I look at humans as a source of food, this is all work done by Debuttam. Dogs, as I've been saying, use scavenging as well as begging. Here you see, this is actually Bimalda's stall. Somebody is eating Maggie, and look at the juveniles nicely, giving him drooling looks. So human feeders also play an important role. This is how many dogs have actually survived during the pandemic. And this puppy eyes look, which is supposed to melt our hearts, is what seems to have played a major role in their evolutionary history with us. And there is this idea that the hormone oxytocin plays a very important role in this. So initially, we started with a series of experiments to look at dog human interactions. And the first of this was to ask if dogs which have not received any training, dogs which are living on the streets, are they capable of understanding simple human pointing gestures? Because pet dogs are very good at following human pointing gestures. So we did these experiments where you have two bowls. One actually has a piece of chicken in it. The other has been sham baited by rubbing chicken in it, but does not have a reward. Both are covered by a cardboard box. One person sets this up, puts it there, and another person comes and randomly points to a box. So the pointer does not know which one actually has a reward. So the dog might or might not get a reward if it follows pointing. And this pointing, you note, we bend down close to the box and point, and we have a control condition where there is no pointing. We did this experiment with a large number of pups, juveniles, and adults. And what we found was that while pups readily follow pointing, juveniles and adults kind of are in the 50-50 range. So we cannot say whether they went there by chance or they followed pointing because the probability is equal. Interestingly, for adults, we found something which we did not find for juveniles and pups. We did 3 trials for every dog, and we found that when an adult followed a pointing and got a reward, then it followed pointing again with a higher probability. If it followed pointing and did not get a reward, then it refused to follow pointing again. So there is both positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. This is something which is not seen in the juveniles and pups. And this is very interesting because this means that by this one interaction with this unfamiliar human, the dog is being judging this human and deciding whether or not to trust them. The next set of experiments, we said, let's make life a little more complex for the dogs. We are going to use complex pointing. In this case, Shaurabh showed momentary pointing. So put the balls, point momentarily and remove the point and stand neutrally, or dynamic distal pointing where you point continuously, but from a distance, don't bend down, don't make it very clear to the dog. And then we thought that you considered these as complex based on the literature on pets. But what we found was that both for dynamic as well as momentary pointing, the results were more positive, in the sense the more and more dogs followed these pointings than they had done for the initial experiment. So uh, we basically realized that probably the dogs on the streets are more used to somebody throwing food to them and not really bending down low and feeding them from a bowl. And this bending down low and pointing very close might actually put off the dogs and make them more wary of the pointer than in case of the dynamic distal and momentary distal pointing. We asked next, how good are the dogs at understanding human body language? So can they understand stances like a threatening gesture? So we had 3 kinds of experiments, one in which the thumb bends down and makes this I sound to call out to the dog. Second is what we call a low impact threat, where he stands at a distance and just raises a hand, and a high impact threat, where he has a 1 foot long stick, which he raises. He doesn't throw the stick, doesn't harm the dog, just shows the stick. And for each of this, we show this, which is the social cue phase. And then we have a food provisioning phase in which the same dog is offered a piece of food by the experimenter. So the first one lasts for 30 seconds, 1.5 meters away from the dog, and then the food is provided and the experimenter stands in a neutral position. What we found, this looks very complex, but what we found basically is for the neutral, friendly, as well as low impact threatening cue, there is a response when you have the food provisioning phase. Whereas in the social cue phase, the dogs will not approach, they'll approach when you give them food, but not so in the high impact threatening cue. So even if you give them food, the dogs are wary of you once that you have showed them a stick, and they will not come to you readily. So the free ranging dogs can definitely understand human intentions from social gestures and then adjust their behavior accordingly. We asked what happens if you do the same experiment with groups of dogs, because we often have this feeling that when they're in a group, they are more aggressive. When we did the same experiment with dog groups, we again found that the dogs were approaching more when they were showing the friendly cue, and they were showing more fearful reactions when they were alone, as when they were in a group. Interestingly, when we saw the high impact threatening cue, then dogs in groups showed a little more response than the solitary dogs in the food provisioning phase in this case, but still all of this was much lower than the response of the groups of dogs as well as solitary dogs in the other phases, because they're also, even though they are in a group, they're still scared of you if you show them a stick. One of my most favorite experiments is this, where we try to understand how on earth does a stray dog build trust on a random human. They will suddenly, follow us around, wag their tails at us. What tells them that we are the right people, and A is the right person and B is not. So we did these experiments where there is a piece of chicken here, and then there's a piece of chicken in Shubhro's hand. He bends low near the road and calls out to the dog. The dog has the option of either feeding on this piece of chicken or this piece of chicken. And once the dog has made a choice, the other piece is removed. So for one set of dogs, we just do this. After it has fed on this piece of chicken or this piece of chicken, it is given another piece of chicken. For another set of dogs, once it has made its choice, it is not given any extra food, but petted on the head 3 times. So we call this petting, or this is the social cue. And we found that typically dogs are more reluctant to feed from the hand from this stranger. So more dogs feed from the ground. Once we have given them either an extra piece of food or petting, we found that whether there is social reward or no social reward, most of them don't change their first response. Change is much low. Only 20 to 30% of the dogs change their response from what it was the previous time. Most of them continue to either feed from the hand if they fed from the hand the previous time, or feed from the road if they fed from the road the previous time. Now we said, what happens with repeated interactions? So we did what we call the food reward experiment with 21 dogs. They were followed. Each individual dog was tested on day 0 with the same paradigm. Day 1, then 2 days later, day 3, 3 days later, day 6, and so on and so forth, up to day 15. And we found that some dogs fed from the hand, which are the dots. Some dogs did not, which are the crosses. And there wasn't really much change, even though we gave them extra food every day. So 11 out of 21 individuals were consistently eating from the road. We did this with only petting. So you go do the experiment and then you pet the dog on the head. And then every day you don't give them food, just pet them on the head and do the trial. And we found that if you see all of these red ones, they are the dogs which did not feed from the hand on day 1. Day 2 itself, they fed from the hand. And most of them continued to feed from the hand. And so there were on day 0, there were 7 dogs which took food from the hand. On day 15, the number had doubled. There were 15 dogs which were now feeding from the hand. So there was definitely a significant impact of the social reward rather than the food reward. Devatam did a follow-up experiment on this. It's a combination of the food reward, social reward experiment and the pointing experiment. So on day 1, you test random dogs for pointing gesture. You note whether they followed pointing or not. Then for the next 3 days, One set of dogs is given social reward and the other set is not given social reward. Then on day 5, you test them with the pointing gesture again. And what we find is for the no social reward condition, the results are the same. Whether you have given them food or not doesn't matter. In the social reward condition on day 5, there's a huge increase in following of pointing. And this is not drawn to scale because actually this would have gone up somewhere there. So what we found was dogs don't follow pointing when they are provided with food rewards, which is the control condition. Dogs that have been petted followed pointing. And then we tested, instead of doing this in the blind, we actually pointed them to the wrong bowl every time. So we give them a deceptive cue. And we found that in spite of being deceived, they again followed pointing in the next trial. So they were no longer showing their negative reinforcement as they are supposed to do in the normal condition. So you can see how strong the social reward can be for just a period of 3 consecutive days. This is the last chunk of work that I will talk about very briefly. We tried to understand in the population how dogs' lives are being impacted by humans. Debutam looked at the social networks of dogs, and we found very surprisingly, so this is a dog group. Dogs are interacting with each other, or each arrow is depicting interactions. So there are interactions, both positive and negative among dogs. And then there are interactions with humans. This one circle of human depicts all interactions with humans. And we found that the red ones are mostly the negative interactions, which are mostly initiated by humans. And then there are some positive negative interactions from dog to human. So we find that humans occupy almost the central position in the social networks of dogs, not their group members, but there are too many interactions that dogs have with humans. And actually, statistically, negative interactions are very low from dogs to humans. Positive interactions are higher from dogs to humans. We try to see how human densities in different areas, or rather human flux, the number of people passing through a given place at a given time, impacts the behavior of dogs. So we looked at very crowded areas like stations and markets, intermediately crowded areas, and very low crowded areas. And we found that while human flux is, of course, high, medium, and low, in these areas, the approachability of dogs, so the tendency of a dog to approach you when you just call out to them, you're a stranger to them, you go there and just call out, I, and will the dogs approach you? The tendency to approach is higher in the high and intermediate flux zones, whereas in low human flux zones, the dogs are much more reluctant to approach humans. And this study was done pan-India in 9 different cities, 60 different sites, tested 200 adult dogs. So this is the first time we were trying to actually quantify responses of dogs with respect to the human environment that they are being exposed to. A follow-up of this work was actually done this time of the year, 2 years back. That is why I thought I'll just briefly mention this. This is Durga Puja, the festival, where people throng the streets in millions and eat, and eat. So there are a lot of people, very high human flux, and there's a lot of food, lot of garbage. So we said for the dogs, on the one hand, there is like too many humans around, which might be a threat, but then there is also huge amount of surge in resources. What do the dogs do? So Devotam actually went around surveying areas where where we know that there are big pujas which are going to happen 1 month before Durga Puja, during Durga Puja, 1 month after Durga Puja. The same areas were sampled. This black boxes are pre-event, so 1 month before. Open circles are during the event, and red triangles are post-event. And on the x-axis, we have human flux, and on the y-axis, you have dog abundance. As you see here, human flux has increased, dog abundance has decreased in the period of the event as compared to this. We also looked at what the dogs were doing during these times. We found that there is an increase in vigilance behavior of the dogs, and the dogs are more separated out and distributed than resting in clusters during the period of the event. So obviously, they're not being lured by the extra food. they are maintaining their distance from the crowds. So it's not just always food which will decide the behavior of dogs. So I will sum up. Free-ranging dogs have a very active and a very complex social lives of their own. Humans are a big threat to the survival, but then we are also a major source of food and love for the dogs. They have complex interactions with us, and they are very good at understanding our social gestures, which is what has probably made them survive for so long in the human jungle. And lifetime experience with humans is something that is likely to shape personalities of free ranging dogs, and that is the next project that we are embarking into. I would like to leave you with this one paragraph from a piece that I have written recently, which kind of sums up my feeling about the entire dog human scenario on our streets. We need to understand that we share our habitat with them. Their ancestors have scavenged on the battlefields of our ancestors, given birth in their courtyards, and have been fed leftover from our meals. They are a species we share our ecosystems with, like the crows, mynas, rats, bees, ants, and monkeys. They have been on the streets in the Indus Valley and Indraprastha, in Kalinga and Kurukshetra, in Banaras and Bangalore. As the Delhi High Court says, this is the recent ruling of the Delhi High Court that I refer to, which says that dogs have a right to being fed. They do have a right to life, a right to food and water, and we can provide this unobtrusively, as we have done for centuries. They don't need us to interfere in their lives. They just need our tolerance and perhaps a little indulgence. So I will stop here. Thanks to all the funding agencies and the dogs, and of course, Cogito for the invitation. And I'm happy to take any questions.
That was a very beautiful quote. Um, on the YouTube, I can't see any questions so far, but I had one. It's not a question per se, it's just a thought. I had seen an article on your notice board, I think, regarding the grandmother type behavior of dogs. And like you said, milk theft. It sounds very funny the way the puppies actually. So, what I wanted to ask was even when the mothers are present, do they still engage in milk theft type behaviors?
Yes. So basically, what we figured out is the pups don't care whether it's the mother. There's a lactating female, pups are hungry, and they just run and grab the female and start suckling.
Oh,
And often it is done from the back. And we have actually seen cases where there is a mother and there are two mothers in the group. And typically, the mother with the older litter, she has started rejecting suckling attempts already. So she has already entered the weaning conflict phase. And the younger offspring's mother, she is still in the active nursing stage. And she's the one who becomes victim of milk theft more often, because the older pups go and steal milk from her, and her pups are much smaller, they get left behind.
I've seen that, but I've never actually sort of connected that in my head. That's very nice.
Yeah, so often it's in addition to sibling rivalry, you actually have like cousin rivalry happening, inter-litter rivalry happening.
And other than just milk theft, does what other characters entail sort of the allopatric relationship other than playing?
So allo mothers actually show care in terms of licking and cleaning, protecting. So these they do actively. And we thought they're also nursing actively until we looked into the details of each of the bouts.
Okay. Anyway, I still don't see any questions, so I think we can end this here. Thank you so much for such a lovely talk. I genuinely enjoyed learning so much, and you've done a lot of work, so that was very impressive. So
Thank you.
thank you so much for accepting our invitation and giving us this wonderful talk. We hope to hear much more from your work in the future.
Hope so. Bye.
Bye. Should I cut it?